Currently, there are two add-ons for Create that are focused on electricity production. These mods are New Age and Crafts and Additions. Both mods represent electricity as forge energy, and as a result, allow for a conversion between the rotation from Create and a form of energy that's used by many other mods. In this video, I'll be comparing the features present in each mod, and I'll also discuss the advantages that one might have over the other in different areas. Hopefully, I'll be able to help you decide on which mod is right for you. So let's get started by having a look at how these mods generate electricity. Alright, so in Crafts and Additions, electricity is generated by applying rotation to the alternator. So here I have some water wheels and they're producing 2048 stress units. They're only running at 4 RPM, and because alternators have a minimum required RPM of 32, I'm using the speed controller to increase that RPM. So if we look at it here, we see we're getting 45 forge energy per tick. So what that translates to, we send it to the electric motor, is we can get an output of 1,536 stress units, which is 3/4 of the input stress units from the water wheels. So in Crafts and Additions, we have a 75% efficiency rate of transforming rotation into electricity. And if we look at the crafting recipes, you can see that both the alternator and the electric motor need to be made using mechanical crafting, so they require brass. So these are not early game items. You need to go into the nether and capture a blaze to get a blaze burner to be able to make brass. So these are for the mid game and onwards. So over here we have a setup for generating power in Create New Age. So here we have generator coils spinning within some magnetic blocks. So this is magnetite and this is the lowest tier of magnetic block. There are several tiers. So if we look here, we have magnetite all the way up to netherite magnets. So as to how efficient this is, well, we see with the same setup, we're only getting 19 electricity per tick compared to 45. So there's a different symbol. There's electricity here, and here we have FE. They are the same, as we'll see in just a bit. So here I am giving it a bit more speed, but I'm using the exact same amount of stress units. So in both cases, I'm giving them the amount of speed that they're adapted to, the amount of speed that will use up as much of the stress units as possible. So once we have the generator coil spinning within these magnetic blocks, we place some carbon brushes and then we attach some connectors and some wire to connect the electricity to the basic motors. So in this case, we have an output of 19 electricity per tick and we get an output of 650 stress units. So that's 650 out of the 2000 that we're putting in. So that's a lot less efficiency than we get with the alternator from Crafts and Additions. So one thing in particular about the electric motor from Crafts and Additions is that the output is dependent on the speed. So if I reduce this from 24 to, let's say, 12, I get less stress units. And if I try to increase this all the way up to, let's say, 30, well, I'll have more stress units, though I'm using up a bit of the energy that I have stored up, and this is not sustainable. So I'll put it back down to 24 RPM, where we have an equilibrium, where we're using the same amount of electricity that we're putting into it, and we're getting out the same 1,536 stress units from before. Now, if we contrast that with the basic motor from New Age, we can crank this up as fast as we want. We have the same output of stress units and we're using the same amount of energy. So this is one advantage of the motors from Create New Age. So this will always put out the same amount of stress units no matter the speed. So we've seen the lowest tier magnetic block from New Age. So how does that compare to the highest tier, the netherite magnet block? So first of all, this is really expensive. If we look here, it costs 4 pieces of netherite scrap, 5 overcharged diamond, which are basically just a diamond that you give electricity to. So they're really expensive, and we're only getting out 50 electricity per tick compared to the alternator from Crafts and Addition, which is giving us 45. So using netherite magnets only gives us a little bit more efficiency for a lot more cost. So in this case, I think the clear winner is Crafts and Additions in terms of electricity generation, if we're looking at it from a purely number standpoint. Though I think if you want to go for aesthetics, Create New Age does have this generator coil that looks pretty cool while it's spinning. So in the looks department, I think Create New Age is the winner. And something important to know about the motors in these mods is that they both have the same rate of conversion from forge energy to stress units. So what I mean by this is we have 45 forge energy going into this motor and we're using it all and we're getting 1,536 stress units. So if I take that same 45 energy per tick and give it to the motors from Create New Age and use up all that energy, I'm getting the same output. Though I do have the ability to give it whichever RPM I want. So the motors from Create New Age are technically superior to the electric motor from Create Crafts and Additions. So the basic motor from Create New Age is limited to 128 RPM. The electric motor from Crafts and Additions can go all the way to 256. So there are higher tiers of motors in Create New Age, which we'll see in just a bit. But first, let's have a look at the maximum output that an electric motor from Create Crafts and Additions can produce. So here we have one that's taking 480 forge energy per tick. That's because we have it set to 256 RPM, and the output stress units are dependent on the RPM. So at maximum speed, we have an output of 16,384 stress units. So let's see how that compares to the motors from Create New Age. So here's the basic motor that I've used in my examples so far. This one's using 15 energy per tick, and it's giving us an output of 512 stress units, which is independent of the output speed. We have the next tier, which is the strong motor, and this one uses 60 energy per tick and gives us 2,048 stress units. An even higher tier is the reinforced motor, so this one takes 240 energy and gives us 8,192 stress units. There's also add-ons for the motors called extensions. This is the basic one, and this one doubles the amount of stress capacity. So this one gives us 16,384 stress units, which is the same as a maximum powered motor from Crafts and Additions, and if we look here, we're using the same amount of energy per tick. So this is further proof that both mods have the same rate of conversion from electricity to stress units. And finally, we have the strong motor extension, when if placed on a reinforced motor, gives us an output of 65,536 stress units, or the price of 1.9 thousand electricity per tick. Alright, so we just saw the basics of how to generate electricity in both mods, and how to turn that electricity into rotation using electric motors. There's still a lot of things to cover, such as nuclear reactors, Tesla coils, and a way of feeding liquid fuels directly to blaze burners. But first, let's have a look at how power transmission works in both of these mods. So both of these mods use wires and connectors to send the electricity to their destinations. So in Create Crafts and Additions, we have the concept of small connectors and large connectors. Those small connectors can only be connected to up to 4 other connectors. If I try to connect another connector to this small connector here, I get a message saying that the wire node is full. There's these regular small connectors, and there's also small connectors with lights, which have the exact same behavior. If I try to connect the wire, I get the exact same message. Here we have the large connectors. Now, large connectors are different in 2 ways. It can connect to up to 6 different connections, and it'll work. So here, if I try to add another connection, I'm going to get the same message. But there's also another limitation. There's also the concept of high current wires and low current wires. So if I try to connect these 2 large connectors with a low current wire like copper, I'll get a message saying that it requires a high current wire. So that means I need to use something like Electrum, which is a high current wire. So the name is a little bit misleading because it doesn't affect the amount of current or energy that can go through, only the amount of connectors and to which type of connectors it can connect. So high current wires can be connected to any kinds of connectors, but low current wires can only be connected to low current connectors. On the other hand, Create New Age does not have these concepts. Instead, they simply have connectors, and they seem to be able to connect to as many connectors as you want. So here I've connected a single connector to 24 other connectors. So if there is a limit, it seems to be a very high amount. Instead of a concept where a certain kind of wire can be connected to a certain amount of connectors, Create New Age has a concept of how much energy the wire can transfer. So copper wires, the lowest tier, can transfer up to 1,024 electricity per tick. And the highest tier of wire, which is the overcharged diamond wire, can transfer up to 8,192 energy per tick. So both mods have different concepts attached to their wires and connectors, so keep those in mind when you're trying to decide which mod is right for you. So now, let's have a look at the maximum length of the wires in each of these mods. So in Crafts and Additions, anything connected to a small connector or a small connector with a light can have a maximum distance of up to 16 blocks, no matter if it's a low current wire or a high current wire. So for example, if I take this Electrum spool and try to connect it to a connector that's 17 blocks away, I'm going to get a message that says that the wire is too long. In the case of large connectors, we can go all the way up to 32 blocks. So if I go to this block over here that's 33 away and try to connect it, well, I'm going to get the same message. I'm going to get the message that says that the wire is too long. So 16 for small connectors and 32 for large connectors. Over here in New Age, the maximum wire length is 15 blocks. So if I go over here and try to connect this wire that's 16 blocks away, I'm going to get a message that says that it's too long. But wait a minute, it says the maximum wire length is 16 blocks, So didn't I just say 15 blocks? Well, the answer is because of how Create New Age measures the block distance. Over here in Crafts and Additions, the length seems to be measured from the middle of the block, which is more realistic since that's where the connector is. However, over here on the New Age side of things, it seems to add this other half block over here. So while the connectors in Create New Age are 16 blocks apart, they're really in the middle of each of their blocks. So there's an extra half block on each side that's not being considered. So both mods just have a different way of measuring the distances, which means that in Create Crafts and Additions, the wires can go up to 1 block longer. So that's why both mods say that the maximum length is 16 blocks, but on the New Age side of things, that the length is actually 1 shorter. And it just comes down to how each mod measures the distance of the wire. So before we move on, one last point about wires and connectors. So what happens when you have a source that's not giving enough energy for the destination? So let's start off by looking at how Crafts and Additions handles it. So here I have an alternator producing 45 forge energy per tick, and it's going to 3 motors that are each trying to pull 22 forge energy per tick. So how Crafts and Additions handles it is that it gives all the energy to one, all the energy to the next one until there's none left, and it just gives a little tiny trickle to the last one, so it does not split up how the energy is transmitted. So how New Age handles this is that it actually splits the energy equally between all the destinations. So here I have a source giving out 50 energy, and it's giving exactly 10 to each one. So these motors normally try to take 15 energy per tick, but here they're just taking 10 because that's all that's available to them. So there's actually another consideration to how Create New Age splits the electricity. So here all 5 motors are connected to a single connector. But let's say I give each motor on the side their own connector. What's going to happen then? Well, they're going to get the full amount, and the remainder will be split across the 3 that are connected to the connector in the middle. So what's happening is the carbon brush is actually first distributing the energy equally to each of its connectors, and then whatever's left over will go to each of the individual motors. So you might be wondering if this logic applies to Crafts and Additions. Well, let's see. So if I place a connector and connect it to its own connector on the source, will it get split? Well, the answer is no. Crafts and Additions seems to prioritize whichever motors were connected first, or whichever motors are currently taking in energy. So for example, if I break this one and it runs out of energy and then I reconnect it, well, it's going to prioritize this motor here. So this motor will continue to get energy while this one here will be starved. And it's also going to wait for this motor to be completely charged with energy before it gives whatever's left over to this last motor. So personally, I find the way that Create New Age handles this to be more intuitive. It makes a lot more sense that the energy would be split in this way rather than the way that Crafts and Additions does it, where it gives to one, gives to the other, and then it starves the last one, despite the fact that they're all connected to the same connector. So let's move on to some non-electricity features, and this is one of my favorite features in any mod. This is just a straw. So what's so interesting about a straw? Well, we can give it to a blaze burner, and as you can see here, a blaze burner with a straw can be fed directly with a pipe. So no more setting up mechanical arms or deployers, worrying about filling up buckets. You can just feed the lava directly. So why shouldn't you anyway? Personally, I think that this is a feature that should be in vanilla Create mod. You shouldn't even need an item. Why would you need an item? There's pipes in the mod, there's fluids. You can already feed lava. So all it's doing is changing the way that you can feed the lava to a blaze burner. So I just think this is an amazing quality of life improvement, and it makes setting up steam engines so much easier. Another bonus that this mod adds is it adds 2 new fuels. It adds seed oil and biofuel. So there's simple recipes for making these, and it makes it so that you don't need to use just lava to feed your blaze burners. So seed oil will have the same effect of lava, and it'll have the normal burning animation. Whereas biofuel is a bit more complex, and it'll give you the blue flame animation, which means that the blaze is burning hotter, and you can get more output out of your steam engine this way. So not to be outdone, Create New Age also has a way to heat your steam engines. So there's a concept that's called heat. So New Age adds heat, and one way of getting heat is through solar power. So to harness the solar power, you need to use solar plates. Now these only work when the sun is out and if they have a clear line of view to the sky. So here you see that this is generating 50 something temperature per second. And I have these pipes to transfer the heat, and what I have here is a Stirling engine. So we can bypass the steam engine entirely if we want to have a small scale operation. So this Stirling engine is being heated with 100 temperature per second, and we're getting 1024 stress units at a speed of 32 RPM. So this is a great option if you just want a little bit of power, but of course it only works so long as there are heat in the pipes. So if we want to heat a steam engine, we have to use the boiler heater. So what I have is I have multiple solar plates and I'm using the heat pump to send the heat to the boiler heaters. So these heat pumps, they work kind of like pipes, but you can send it in a certain direction so you can focus the direction of the heat better, and it's just a more efficient way of transferring the heat to the destination. So this steam engine is running with only the power of the sun. Of course, once it goes dark, or if I place blocks over the solar plates, it's going to stop running when it runs out of heat. The next feature is really neat. What if you want to store your energy? Well, you can do that with accumulators. Accumulators are basically batteries. So they are stackable like fluid tanks. So you can place individual blocks, you can put them in a 2x2 or a 3x3 formation. When you're sending electricity to these, just be sure to use the right type of setting on your connector. So it has to be pushed to push it in, and it needs to be set to pull it out. So just be sure that your connectors are set to the right mode. So Crafts and Additions actually adds a new redstone component. It adds the redstone relay. So currently I have energy coming in on this side here, which is the push side, and I have energy that can potentially come out on the pull side. Notice no energy is flowing right now. That's because it's not receiving a redstone signal. And if I flick this lever, the electricity will flow from one side to the other, and the motor will start running. Alright, so up next we have the Tesla coil. So the Tesla coil is a deadly block. So if I stand here within 3 blocks and I flick this lever, well, I'll start to get electrocuted. Luckily, I'm in creative mode, so I'm not taking damage, but even in creative mode, I can't even walk. I have to just hop because I'm getting electrocuted and I guess my legs don't work. So once I hop out of distance, I'll be safe and I can turn the lever off. So what happens if we place some mobs? We'll see how much damage it does right now. And we'll have a look at these poor pigs, and they're losing hearts very quickly, so this could actually be useful either in a mob spawner or to protect your base from hostile mobs. And the Tesla coil also has another use. It can be used to charge items from other mods with forge energy. This is simply added as a way to have compatibility with other mods. Crafts and Additions also adds a few items that are kind of miscellaneous. They're not really related to electricity or power production, so let's have a look at some of these. So we have some new cakes, the honey cake and the chocolate cake, and they behave exactly like the regular cake from normal unmodded Minecraft. Barbed wire is also added by this mod, so it'll slow down any players or mobs moving through it, and it'll also deal them damage as they cross through it. So if I place the spider here, notice that when he's not moving, he's not taking damage, but as he moves through, he'll take some more damage, and it deals quite a bit of hearts, so any mob moving through this won't last long. There's also a new tier of sandpaper added. This is diamond grit sandpaper, and it behaves just like normal sandpaper, but it has higher durability. The mod also adds the pale gold amulet, which makes the wearer basically invincible. Personally, I find this to be a little bit overpowered because the recipe is not that expensive. It just takes electrum and emeralds, which are not all that hard to get. Though I could see this being useful if you're playing with someone who's a bit younger and maybe not as good as the game and you want to play in survival mode with them. So this might be a way of accommodating a player of lesser skill while still being able to enjoy the game with them. So that's the last of the features from Crafts and Additions that I'll be showing in this video. Before we have a look at 2 full-powered steam engines that are both powered by and have energy extracted by elements from both of these mods, let's have a look at the last feature from Create New Age. So this is the nuclear reactor. The nuclear reactor is really just a big source of heat. So it does not actually produce any electricity in and of itself. What you have to do is you actually have to use that heat to power a boiler or some Stirling engines to extract any usable energy from it. To fuel the nuclear reactor, you have to make nuclear fuel. And to do this, all you have to do is find some thorium ore, which gives you thorium, and then you process that to get radioactive thorium. So the transformation process is quite simple. All you have to do is put some thorium through some crushing wheels and you have a 10% chance of getting radioactive thorium. And once you have your radioactive thorium, all you need to do is press it, apply an iron sheet to it and press it again, and you have your nuclear fuel. The nuclear fuel then needs to be inserted through a funnel into the reactor fuel inserter. It then gets put into these reactor rods where the reaction takes place and the heat is generated. You then need to extract the heat using the reactor heat vent. From there, you just use heat pumps and heat pipes and send it over to boiler heaters to dissipate the heat. But there's a few dangers to using nuclear reactors. The first is radiation. So you'll notice on this side I have reactor glass and a reactor casing. This will actually protect anything from radiation. So if I put a pig here, the pig will be unharmed. However, there's no reactor glass on this side. So I'm in creative mode, so I'm immune. But if I were in survival, I would take damage, and so would any mob here. You'll notice these mobs are starting to take damage. This is from the radiation. So just be sure that you have reactor glass encasing the reactor. otherwise you'll take damage. The other danger when it comes to nuclear reactors is having a nuclear meltdown, and a nuclear meltdown occurs when you can no longer properly dissipate the heat. So here we have the reactor rods, and you'll notice it says a temperature out of 26,000 degrees. 26,000 degrees is when the meltdown occurs. So you could have a meltdown, for example, if your boiler heaters were disconnected or if you just didn't have enough boiler heaters to dissipate the heat. So when you make a nuclear reactor, make sure you already have your heat dissipation system set up. And I'll show you what a reactor meltdown looks like at the end of this video. Now I'll show you how elements from both of these mods can be used to produce rotation and to transform that into electrical energy. So using elements from crafts and additions, we can fuel this steam engine. What we're doing is we're taking biofuel and feeding it to blaze burners with straws, and these are heating up the fluid tank to the maximum amount. We're then speeding up the output of the steam engine to 256 because the output of each alternator is dependent on the speed that we put into it. A full-size steam engine is capable of supporting 15 alternators, so each one puts out 360 forge energy, so if you multiply that by 15 you have 5,400 forge energy per tick. And then we can take that energy and either store it into an accumulator for later or use it immediately in whatever process we're trying to support. So using Create New Age, we can set up a nuclear reactor that's providing enough heat for this full-powered steam engine. You might have noticed that this reactor is different from the previous one I showed you. This reactor is larger, which means it generates more heat and it requires more reactor heat vents to extract all the heat from the reactor. I then set up a series of heat pipes and heat pumps to send the heat to these boiler heaters, which have given this steam engine enough heat to run at maximum power. So with the output of a maximum size steam engine sped up to 256 RPM and the highest tier of magnet in Create New Age, we get an output of 6,900 energy per tick, which is actually more than the output that we get from the alternators in crafts and additions. This slightly higher efficiency does come at a much higher price, requiring 4 netherite scrap and 5 diamonds for each 2 netherite magnets, so keep this in mind when making your decision between these two mods. Now let's see what a reactor meltdown looks like. I've destroyed the ability of this reactor to cool itself, and you see the reactor rods are now slowly increasing in temperature. So to sum up what I think about these two mods, I think that Crafts and Additions is the more effective mod. I think it's the more practical mod. So as we've seen, the alternators are very efficient compared to all but the highest tier of magnet from New Age, though you do require brass to make the alternator. The lowest tier from New Age, however, does not require brass, but it's very inefficient. And the highest tier, though it is more efficient than the alternator from Crafts and Addition, it requires an obscene amount of materials, making it a very late game item. I do prefer how electricity is spread out when there's not enough in New Age, however. I find it a lot more intuitive than how it works in Crafts and Additions. Crafts and Additions also adds the straw, which I think is extremely practical and is such a huge quality of life upgrade. I think it really should be part of the base Create mod. I do prefer the aesthetics from New Age, however. I think that the multi-block ways of generating electricity are more fitting with the theme of Create. I also like the look of the rotating generator coils. And on top of that, I think the nuclear reactors just have a certain cool factor to them. So these reactor rods are about to reach their critical temperature, at which point the reactor will experience a nuclear meltdown. So as you can see, when a meltdown occurs, the reactor rods turn into corium. Some of them will stay where they are and they will sink down into the ground. This one just turned into solid corium just now. The reactor heat vent melted and turned into lava. So one thing I didn't mention is in this mod, when things overheat, they can melt and turn into lava. So that's what happened to the heat vent here. So that's what happens when you have a reactor meltdown.